Montana Territory. Spring of 1873. The wind carried dust and music through the cracked windows of the Bell River Saloon, where Desiree Hall danced in worn slippers for coins she never saw fall. She had not eaten since yesterday morning. The floorboards creaked beneath her as she spun, skirts brushing against the boots of men who stared too long and touched too easy. Her chest ached with the weight of it all, the hunger, the silence, the eyes. She danced because the owner said she had to if she wanted her pay. She danced because it meant she could bring bread home for her little boy. Orrin was 5. He had her eyes and liked to hum to himself when he drew with a broken bit of charcoal on scrap paper. He did not ask where his father went. He just asked when Mama would come home. That was the part that made her cry when the saloon doors swung shut behind her each night. The piano clanged too loud. Laughter cut like knives. Desiree turned and dipped, her breath tight in her lungs, her knees stiff from cold. Her fingers trembled as she lifted her arms again, performing the same tired steps. A man grabbed her waist. She twisted away like she always did. That was when he walked in. The Cowboys' boots hit the floor with slow, steady steps. Dust clung to the brim of his hat. His coat was worn but clean, collar turned up against the wind. He leaned against the bar, not looking at her, just watching the room like a man who could end a fight before it started. His name was Abraham Ellison, and she remembered it later because it sounded like something solid. Something that could hold weight. Desiree did not stop dancing. She could not afford to, but her eyes flicked to him once, then again. He did not leer. He did not smile when the music ended and the coins were tossed without care near her feet. She bent to gather them with shaking hands. The saloon owner, a greasy man named Burley, barked, "One more set, girl." Desiree straightened. Her legs were trembling. "I need to get home." Burley stepped forward. "You leave now, you don't come back." She looked at the 4 coins in her hand, not enough for bread and soap. "Then I'll dance," she whispered. The piano started up again. Her arms ached. Her head spun. And then a coin clinked against the floor right in front of her, brass and bright. She looked up. The cowboy stood there now, hat still low over his eyes, voice rough with dust and distance. "You only dance with me now." Burley stepped forward, red-faced. "She dances with whoever pays." Abraham turned toward him. "I just paid." Desiree stared at him. "Why?" He looked at her, then really looked at her. "Because you look like you're about to drop, and I do not want to see that happen." Her mouth went dry. "You do not even know me." "I do not have to see you're tired." He held out a hand. She hesitated. Then she took it. They danced slow without music. The piano stopped. The room was quiet enough to hear boots shifting on wood and a glass being set down behind the bar. Desiree's hand trembled in his. She tried to keep her distance, but his other hand went to her back, steady and warm. "Tell me your name," he said quietly. "Desiree Hall." "Desiree," he repeated. "That's a good name." He led her in a slow turn. No one else moved. No one spoke. When the music did not start again, Abraham gave her hand a soft squeeze and stepped back. "You want to get out of here?" he asked. She blinked. "You mean?" "Not what you think," he said. "I will walk you home." That is all. She should have said no, but her body was empty and her heart was tired, and there was something in his voice that made her want to believe. So she nodded. They stepped out into the cold air. The sun was setting behind the pines, painting the sky gold and gray. Abraham walked beside her without talking, hands in his coat pockets, head tipped toward the wind. She led him down a dirt road, past shuttered shops and laundry lines. He glanced at every sound, every movement, not nervous, just aware. When they reached her door, she paused. "Thank you." He looked at the small cabin. "You live here alone with my son?" He nodded once. "You said you would not ask questions," she said, voice quiet. "I did not, just answered one." She opened the door. Orrin looked up from the floor where he was drawing with a bit of red chalk. His face lit up. "Mama," Desiree dropped to her knees, pulled him close. "I brought a little money. Maybe tomorrow we can get white bread." Orrin's eyes shifted to Abraham. "Who's that?" Desiree looked up. "Someone kind." Abraham tipped his hat to the boy. "Evening." Orrin nodded solemnly. "You look like you ride horses." "I do." "Do you shoot bad guys?" "Sometimes." Desiree smiled faintly, brushing Orrin's hair back. "Go finish your picture." The boy went back to his chalk. Abraham stood in the doorway. "He is a good kid. He is everything." He hesitated. "If you need help." "I have had enough men offer me help, Mr. Ellison." He looked down. "Then I will not say another word about it." She stepped out and pulled the door closed behind her. "Why did you really give me that coin?" "Because I wanted to dance with you. You could have had anyone." "I did not want anyone. I wanted you." She stared at him. "That's not how this works," he shrugged. "Maybe I do not care how it works." Then he tipped his hat and walked away. She watched him go, heart thudding in her chest in a way it had not in years. That night, Desiree could not sleep. She kept thinking of the way he held her, not tight, not possessive, just steady, like someone who knew how to carry weight. And for the first time in a long while, the ache in her chest felt less sharp. Morning brought the scent of wet earth and pine. A soft rain had passed through before dawn, leaving the road outside the cabin slick and dark. Desiree rose quietly, careful not to wake Orrin where he slept curled beneath the patched quilt. She moved through the small space, folding her shawl over her shoulders and pulling her boots on by the hearth. The coins from the night before sat wrapped in a handkerchief beside the door. She tucked them into her skirt pocket and stepped outside, pulling the door closed with a quiet click. She would stop by the bakery before sunrise fully settled, before the line of miners formed and the best loaves were gone. The main road was still empty, the town not yet stirring. A few lanterns burned behind windows, but most of the buildings stood quiet, their paint faded and their signs swaying slightly in the breeze. She walked with her head down, the hem of her skirt brushing against her ankles, her feet sore from the floor of the saloon. When she reached the bakery, the door was still latched. She waited beneath the awning, arms crossed to keep warm, until the baker's son unbolted it from the inside. He was a boy of perhaps 12 with a face full of freckles and hands already calloused from kneading dough. "You're early," he said, rubbing his eyes. "I've got coin," she answered, smoothing the front of her skirt. He nodded and stepped aside. Inside, the scent of flour and yeast hung warm and thick. She chose a small round loaf, still warm from the oven, and handed over the coins. The boy counted them carefully and gave her 2 coppers back. She left with the bread wrapped in a strip of cloth, cradled against her chest, out on the boardwalk. She turned toward home and stopped. Abraham stood across the street, his horse tethered to a post outside the livery. He wasn't looking at her, just adjusting the saddle straps, his shoulders moving with quiet purpose. She hadn't expected to see him again. That he was still in town surprised her more than the way her hands suddenly felt too warm. She crossed the road slowly. "You following me now?" she said, stopping just short of him. He glanced up, then down at the bread in her arms. "Didn't take you for someone who scares easy." "I don't scare," she said, "but I do wonder why you're still here." He tested the cinch strap. "My mare threw a shoe. Smith said she'd be ready by midday. You could have just said you were passing through. If I had been, I wouldn't have come back this morning." She looked at him hard, trying to read beneath the quiet. "You have a name for what this is." He straightened and met her gaze. "Not yet," she drew in a breath. "You're not the first man who's tried to be kind. I'm not trying anything." "Then what are you doing?" He studied her for a long moment. "Maybe I'm just trying to see what you look like when you're not dancing for men who don't know your name." The cloth around the bread tightened in her grip. He didn't press, just stepped back from the horse and said, "You need anything today? I'll manage." "I don't doubt it," he said. "But I asked anyway." She looked down at the loaf in her arms. "You offering help again?" "No." "What then? Company?" Her mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "You plan to talk the whole time?" "No, I'll just walk." She hesitated, then turned toward the road. "Suit yourself." They walked side by side, neither speaking, the only sound the crunch of gravel beneath their boots. The wind tugged at the edge of her shawl, and he reached out once to catch it before it slipped from her shoulder. She let him, though her chest tightened with the unfamiliarity of it. "You always pass through towns like this?" she asked finally. "Only when I've got reason." "You have reason now." "I might." She paused near a split fence where the road narrowed. "You don't seem like a man who does things without thinking them through." "I don't," he said. She turned her head. "Then what made you decide to walk a woman home after watching her dance in a saloon?" "I saw someone trying not to fall apart." The words caught her off guard. She looked away quickly. Orrin pushed the cabin door open before she reached it. His hair stuck up on one side from sleep, and he blinked at the sky like it had betrayed him by waking so soon. "Morning," Abraham said. Orrin waved, then ducked back inside. Desiree stepped up to the door. "We'll eat before noon. You can come by if you want to talk less." His voice was quiet. "I'd like that." She went inside without looking back, hands still wrapped tight around the cloth. The loaf was warm in her palms, but it was the stillness in her chest that surprised her most. She didn't feel like she was bracing anymore. Not right then. By the time the sun had cleared the tree line, Orrin had eaten half the loaf and was drawing again, this time on the back of a flour sack. Desiree watched him from the doorway, her shawl pulled close against the wind. The boy's humming was soft, tuneless, but it filled the space between her ribs like warmth. She hadn't heard anyone knock, but when she turned, Abraham was standing a few steps back, holding a tin pail. "I brought coffee," he said. She looked down at it. "That's a lot of trouble to go through for someone you barely know." "I boiled enough for two," he said. "Seemed a waste to drink it by myself." She stepped aside. Inside, the light angled through the warped glass, catching on dust and the edge of Orrin's drawing. Abraham ducked his head to avoid the low beam near the door and set the pail by the hearth. Desiree poured them each a cup into mismatched tin mugs. She didn't ask where he'd found the beans trade, probably, or maybe a favor owed. She took a cautious sip, then nodded once. "You make it strong. Only way I know." They sat at the small table with its uneven legs and scorch marks at the corners. Orrin glanced up once, then went back to his sketching. Abraham watched him for a moment, then turned to her. "You always planned to stay here." "I didn't plan much," she said. "I just kept moving until I stopped." "You come from the East, Tennessee, before the war." He didn't press, though his brow lifted slightly. "My father was a blacksmith," she said after a moment. "He died before the army came through. The rest fell apart after that." Abraham turned his cup in his hands. "I ran horses from Missouri to Texas before I came north. Figured Montana had enough room for a man to disappear if he needed to." "Is that what you're doing?" she asked. "No," he said. "Not anymore." Outside, a wagon clattered past. Desiree tilted her head toward the sound, then looked back at him. "So what now?" He met her eyes. "I don't know what you need, but I'd like to be part of it, whatever it is." Her fingers traced the rim of her cup. "You think kindness is enough to fix what's broken in me?" "No," he said. "But it might be enough to stop it from breaking more." She looked at him for a long time. The wind pushed against the window pane, soft and steady. Orrin began coloring in a patch of sky with the flat side of his chalk. "I can't promise much," she said. "I'm not asking for promises," he replied. "I'm only asking to stay." She nodded once, not quite trusting her voice. He stood, slow and sure. "I'll be back before dark. I've got work mending tack at the livery. You always carry coffee around, only when I'm hoping for company." He tipped his hat to Orrin, who looked up and gave him a solemn nod in return. Desiree walked him to the door. He paused there and looked down at her, his expression unreadable but steady. "I'll bring supper," he said. "I'll make a fire," she answered. He stepped onto the road without another word. She closed the door behind him, the wood warm under her hand from the sun. Orrin didn't look up. "Is he going to be here a lot?" She crossed the room and sat beside him. "Would that be all right?" Orrin shrugged. "He's quiet. I like quiet." She watched her son fill in the last edge of a hill, his hand careful, his focus deep. Her chest ached, but not the way it used to, not with emptiness. With something gathering, something waiting to grow. By the time Abraham returned, dusk had painted the hills in deep rust and violet. The fire Desiree had started was low but steady, its warmth reaching the far corners of the cabin. Orrin had fallen asleep on the floor beside it, one arm cradled beneath his head, his drawing tucked under his cheek. Abraham knocked gently, more out of habit than necessity. Desiree opened the door with a quiet nod, her sleeves rolled up, the faint scent of soap clinging to her skin. "I brought a rabbit," he said, holding up a cloth-wrapped bundle. "Trapped just outside the ridge, figured it'd go farther than salt pork." She stepped aside. "You know how to dress it. I wouldn't have brought it if I didn't." He moved to the table without waiting for permission, unwrapping the meat with practiced hands. His knife was sharp, movement sure. Desiree reached for the kettle, poured warm water into a bowl without speaking. Abraham didn't glance up. "I'll clean it outside, less mess." She handed him the bowl. "There's a stump behind the shed. You can wash your hands after." He stepped into the cooling evening without another word. She watched him through the window, shoulders solid, posture easy, like a man who didn't rush unless something needed chasing. When he came back in, she'd already pulled the pan from its hook and set a few wild onions into the coals. "You find those nearby?" he asked. "Mile out, near the creek." "Grew up learning what didn't kill you." He crouched beside the hearth and laid the meat in the pan. "You cook like someone who's had to make a little stretch far." She didn't answer. They sat on low stools as the rabbit browned, the scent of it filling the small space. Orrin stirred once but didn't wake. The wind outside had gone still. Abraham shifted, thumb running over the seam of his knee. "You ever think of leaving this place?" She didn't look at him. "And go where?" "Anywhere that doesn't ask so much from you." Desiree turned the meat slowly. "Every place asks something." He let the silence stretch a while. The fire cracked softly. "I've got a parcel north of here," he said. "Not much. A cabin, pasture, few head of cattle." She looked at him then, eyes guarded. "You offering me land now?" "No," he said. "Just telling you where I go when I'm not in town." She studied him. "You live alone?" "I did." The meat was done. She took the pan off the fire, laid the rabbit and onions onto a wooden plate and divided it into 2 portions. When she set his plate in front of him, he murmured a quiet thanks. They ate without hurry. The food was simple, but it settled into her like something earned. When the plates were cleared, Abraham pulled a small tin from his coat and set it on the table. "Coffee grounds," he said. "For tomorrow." She touched the lid, then met his gaze. "You planning to stay the night?" "I wouldn't ask to." She nodded once. "There's a cot on the porch if it don't bother you." "I've slept colder places." She stood, wiping her hands on a cloth. "You say you've lived alone. What made you stop wanting that?" He leaned back, the firelight catching in the lines around his eyes. "Because I saw someone who'd been holding everything together too long on her own." The words landed in her chest like something both soft and heavy. "I ain't used to people noticing," she said. I'm not people. He stood and rolled his sleeves down. I'll see to the cot. She opened the door for him, the night air brushing against her skin. Leave your boots by the step, she said. Porch boards are old. They'll shift if you turn wrong. He paused. You always look after folks you barely know. I don't barely know you anymore. He nodded once and stepped out into the dark. She closed the door and turned the latch, then moved to the hearth, where Orrin now lay deeper asleep. She covered him with the quilt, knelt beside him, and smoothed his hair once before standing. Outside, the boards creaked faintly as Abraham settled in. Desiree sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the dark ceiling above. She didn't understand everything about the man sleeping just feet from her door, but something about his presence made room in her chest where there'd only been corners before, and that was enough for now. The morning broke silver and quiet. Dew clung to the porch rail like glass beads, and the sky held that pale hush that came just before the sun stretched fully awake. Desiree opened the door slowly, careful not to let it creak. Abraham was already sitting up on the cot, boots in hand, his shirt sleeves still rolled from the day before. You sleep? She asked, voice low. Enough, he said, pulling on his boots. Warm morning, skies holding right. She stepped onto the porch and leaned against the post. You heading out early, wagon teams due by the creek crossing, he said. I promised the smith I'd help shoe 2 of them. He's short on hands this week. She nodded and looked out toward the edge of the trees. You always keep your promises. He stood and adjusted the collar of his shirt. If my word ain't good, then I'm worth nothing. A pause settled between them, not uncomfortable, just full. You want us gone, you tell me, he said. She turned her head sharply. You think I invite men to sleep on my porch if I don't want them close? He looked at her for a long moment. No, I don't. She glanced toward the door, then back at him. You'll be here tonight. I will. She let her fingers rest on the porch rail. Then I'll keep supper warm. He walked down the steps, pausing only long enough to say, I'll bring something with roots. Something that fills. By the time he vanished around the bend, the sun had cleared the trees, and the birds had begun their low, scattered song. That afternoon, Desiree mended what she could Orrin's shirt, the seam of her own bodice, a cracked handle on the water bucket that had threatened to give way last week. The rhythm of her hands slowed her thoughts, but not so much that she didn't catch her son watching her from the corner. You don't fix things unless you think they'll last, he said. She looked up. Needle paused mid-stitch. Sometimes you fix things just because you can't afford to throw them away. I think he's gonna stay. She set the needle down. Why do you think that? 'Cause he talks to you like he already knows you, and he don't look scared of anything. She reached over and brushed a thumb across his cheek. You see more than most. He leaned against her side. I like when he's here. The sun dropped behind the ridge before Abraham returned. He carried a burlap sack over one shoulder, boots muddy up to the ankle, and a green-stemmed bundle of turnips in his other hand. You weren't joking, she said, stepping onto the porch as he came up. Figured we'd stew them, he said, wiping his boots on the mat. They hold heat better. They cooked together, quiet but not distant. She handed him the knife for chopping while she stirred the pot. The scent of simmering broth and root filled the cabin, the air thick with something close to comfort. Orrin set the table without being asked. When they sat down, Abraham looked across the table and said, I've been thinking about spring. Desiree raised an eyebrow. It's already here. I mean the next one, he said. My land's got good soil, the kind that holds water. I've been thinking of planting. She set her spoon down. You want to farm? I want to build something that stays. He didn't say more, didn't need to. She felt the weight of it in her chest, the way it settled there, not like a burden, but like a hand that fit. After supper, Abraham cleared the table. Orrin curled up on the rug with a folded blanket, and a small wooden horse Abraham had carved sometime during the day. Desiree watched him turn it in his hands, tracing the grain with one finger. "You made that?" she asked quietly, stepping beside Abraham at the basin. He rinsed a plate. Had a piece of pine left over at the smith's. She picked up a cloth, began drying. "He won't let it go now. I didn't make it to be put away." That night, Abraham didn't sleep on the porch. After Oren had drifted off, she pulled the blanket from the cot and laid it at the foot of her bed. She didn't say anything when Abraham stood in the doorway, hat in hand, waiting. She just reached out and took the hat from him, hanging it on the nail near the door. He crossed the room slowly, as if giving her time to change her mind. When he sat beside her, he didn't touch her at first, just let the stillness settle. Then, gently, he laid his palm over hers. "You sure?" he asked. She met his gaze without flinching. "I don't ask a man into my home twice." He leaned forward, forehead resting against hers. "Then I'll stay." They lay down without hurry. No rush, no heat. Just the slow, careful rhythm of two people who had walked too long alone. And in the dark, when the wind rose and settled again, she let her hand rest against his chest. Steady, solid. A place to lean. By the time the fire died, they were asleep. Years passed quietly, the kind that builds steadiness without drawing attention. Abraham and Desiree married the following summer, beneath the aspen trees just beyond the cabin. Oren stood between them, holding a small ring carved from antler Abraham's handiwork. The boy grew tall, shoulders straight, his quiet nature deepening into something steady and thoughtful. He took to Abraham's tools like he'd been born with them in his hands. The cabin became theirs in every way. Walls patched, new glass set in the windows, a root cellar dug behind the shed. They planted together beans, squash, corn. The land gave back slow but sure. Desiree stopped counting the days since she danced for coins. That life felt distant, like something belonging to a different woman, one who hadn't known the weight of a hand that asked nothing. One who hadn't known how it felt to sit beside a man in the evening light, watching her son carve a fishing pole from a willow branch. Abraham built her a rocking chair the second winter, said her back deserved better after long days. She laughed when he brought it inside, called it crooked. He said, "Then it fits us just right." And it did. They never spoke much of the past. Not because they were hiding, but because they'd already agreed what mattered most was what they built next. And when Desiree looked out across the fields, her hands dusted in flour, her sleeves rolled back for kneading, she knew she had chosen right. The man who had offered her nothing but steadiness had given her everything. Not with promises, but with presence. And in that quiet, enduring way, they loved each other for the rest of their days.